Horror. Why I love it and what it means to me. I'm a big fan of the horror genre. The fear that can be pulled to the surface, dread that sends liquid cold chills tingling down your spine, and the questioning of the human condition in a world filled with these monsters makes me smile and say, I love this genre so very much. To start with, horror is stories that focus on fear, that focus on dread and desperation. It presents a challenge that must be overcome with high emotional taxation and the possibility of death coming to the character at the end of the story. Some horror can be purely psychological, using psychology to scare the character and reader, like Stephen King's The Shining or Truman Capote's Miriam. Sometimes, the horror is a monster that presents a physical threat and invokes fear through that. Most notable is the monsters that cause characters to go through fight or flight moments, like Stephen King's The Mist or Bram Stoker's Dracula. Some of the best horror, though, uses elements of both psychological and physical fear, like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Ridley Scott's Alien. But to start before why I love this genre, it is best to talk about some of the cornerstones of horror. Some of the earliest literature that used horror was Dracula, written by Bram Stoker in 1897, and Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley in 1818. Dracula's story, as stated by Amazon, is that during a business visit to Count Dracula's castle in Transylvania, a young English solicitor finds himself at the center of a series of horrifying incidents. Jonathan Harker is attacked by 3 phantom women, observes the Count's transformation from human to bat form, and discovers puncture wounds on his neck that seem to have been made by teeth. Harker returns home upon his escape from Dracula's grim fortress, but a friend's strange malady involving sleepwalking, inexplicable blood loss, and mysterious throat wounds initiate a frantic vampire hunt. Amazon also states, for the story of Frankenstein, the story of Victor Frankenstein's terrible creation and the havoc it caused has enthralled generations of readers and inspired countless writers of horror and suspense. I own copies of each and love them to death. That said, the genre of horror is as old as human beings have had fear in their bones. I know that there are older works of horror out there, but these 2 are most noted in being the cornerstone of horror. But as the truth holds for any genre, literature isn't the only place where a genre can thrive. Movies, television, music, and video games can all hold elements of horror. But where did my love for this genre come from? Back when my age was still a single digit, I got exposed to the horror genre through 2 sources: Courage the Cowardly Dog and Silent Hill. IMDb describes Courage the Cowardly Dog show as the offbeat adventures of Courage, a cowardly dog who must overcome his own fears to heroically defend his unknowing farmer owners from all kinds of dangers, paranormal events, and menaces that appear around the land. I loved this show as a child and found myself enjoying seeing all the strange monsters he would come across. While it was a show with horror elements, it also held comedy, so it was easier for me to watch at a young age. I loved Courage, and I felt like I wanted to be like him as a kid. Every time he was on the television, I watched and had a smile. But now there comes Silent Hill, during the era of PlayStation 1 gaming. Silent Hill, released in 1999 by Konami, is a survival horror game. Amazon describes the game's story as, in Silent Hill, you assume the role of widower Harry Mason, who is trying to get away from the pain of his wife's loss by taking his daughter on a road trip. After a car accident on the outskirts of the resort town of Silent Hill, you regain consciousness to find that your daughter, who was previously asleep in the back seat, has left or has been taken from the scene. To find her, you must go into town and unlock the secrets that linger 7 years after a tragic fire scarred the town. While I also love Silent Hill as much as any other horror story that I can get my paws into, I didn't learn much this game at a young age, but I did get exposed to it. My first experience with Silent Hill was this. My brother and sister were playing the game, and they told me to stay out of the room. They went as far as putting a blanket on the ground, and said I was not to cross that line as long as it was on the ground. Well, leaning over the blanket isn't crossing the line in my young mind, so when they weren't looking, I leaned my head over the line and tried to watch the game. What I saw was...
What's that? Huh, radio. What's going on with that radio?
As I got out of the room, I could hear loud static, screeching sounds, and gunfire. This scared me, and I made sure to never lean over the blanket again. It would be years until I learned the truth of what I saw. Over the years, I was exposed to other forms of horror elements and some monsters that really catch my eye today, which I plan to talk about at some point. It wasn't until I was about 15 that I got pushed into horror again by my parent. They wanted me to be challenged by what I read, so they handed me a copy of From the Corner of His Eye, which was written by Dean Koontz back in 2000. With school and moving from place to place, I got the story read in a couple of weeks. Back then, I loved what I was reading. Amazon Reviews market the book with a review that states, "This is the story of a boy who loses his sight, and then mysteriously regains it. It is the story of a courageous band of seekers and a relentless killer. It is the story of all that is right with the world and all that is terribly wrong. It is the story of a revelation so terrifying and so sublime, it can only be glimpsed from the corner of his eye." Oh gosh, you know how cheesy that sounds. I mean, really bad. Anywho, I enjoyed the story, but at the same time, it was a story that pushed me to write seriously and not just do bits of fiction for escapism. But what cemented my enjoyment of the horror genre was coming back to Konami and Japanese horror. The first horror game I played was Resident Evil, and it scared me easily with my first exposure to zombies when I entered the mansion. Amazon's product description is, in Resident Evil, you are part of an elite military unit battling an out-of-control supercomputer sent to investigate a remote location. You discover an eerie old mansion transformed by a laboratory accident. Soon you're fighting for your survival against hundreds of mutated scientists and other ghoulish creatures. After that, I became hooked on the genre and enjoyed it thoroughly. I even found myself back in Silent Hill and enjoy my stays in both the video games and the movies. However, there is two questions that must be answered. The first being, why mention horror video games, television, and movies? At the heart of each show and each game is a team of writers coming up with the story. Everything in the media, not just in horror, depends on writers to write the scripts. Each project starts with a story and blooms from there. Some stories are solo work, and some are a team effort. But in the end, a writer is needed to make the story and to start the vision of what can only be seen in an imagination by a person behind the keyboard. The second question is, why do I put in descriptions for each of the stories? Ethically, if I did it for one, I have to do it for them all. But the main thing to note is the similarity of the stories. Each of the stories, be it a group or one person at the center of the story, all have something to overcome and deal with for one reason or another. The reason why this speaks to me is because for most of my life, I had to deal with feelings of depression, pain, suffering, and hopelessness. These stories, which I love, speak to me because at the end of the day, regardless if you beat the problem or not, you have to stand up against it for one reason or another. That gave me a lot of hope in dark times, and it became the main reason why I love the genre. A genre known for being dark and gruesome gave me a light to hold, a light that helped me to stand up with a smile and keep pushing forward. This is what horror means to me, and why I love horror. At some point, I will talk about what all happened in my life, but today, I'll leave you with this. This is PaperFan. Have a good day, and a good life.